Angie, would you mind doing the roll call?
Not at all. All right, Chair Lohman is absent tonight. Vice Chair Foster.
Here.
Brian Dorsey.
Present.
Rich Miller.
I'm here.
Okay. Bob Silverforb.
Here.
Mike Smith.
Here.
Megan Thornton.
Here.
Chris West.
Present.
And Lori Zwingli.
Here.
All right, very good.
Okay, thank you. So has everybody had a chance to take a look at the minutes from last month or any comments or questions?
I did. I read the minutes, and there's a lot of stuff in there. And unless somebody has any questions or corrections, it looks good. So I move that we approve them as submitted.
Second. I second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, then we will go ahead and have them be accepted. And Angie, we can do the signing in the same manner as we did last time?
Yeah, that works great.
Great, thank you. And then we'll move on to the board member announcements. I can't honestly remember how I started in order last month, but let's go ahead and start with Brian, if you wouldn't mind. I think you're on mute.
I am. I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
Yes. So we can touch on this later in the meeting, but as Megan said, there was the opportunity that the chief had asked us to just reach out to the community, get some feedback on how they feel about both situations where the police might disengage, but also just the overall response to how certain scenarios could be handled either better by our police or in different ways, in different manners, depending on the individual that's involved, whether it's a true threat situation, and that's based on, of course, analysis sometimes on the scene. But so I put a question out there, posed it to our friends and neighbors here in Sherwood, and got a lot of great responses back, a lot around mental health, and definitely there's a concern to make sure that those people who are both in crisis situations, but also maybe struggling with mental health, are properly cared for and assisted. And I was able to give those and share those response to the chief. But definite opportunity to educate better our friends and neighbors on what resources are available. And we can get into that a little later, like I said. But there was some great conversation had. Megan's got a great Facebook social page, and they're very active. They had the most responses by far to that question. And I'm just really excited to see the engagement out there. And that's what we're really all about here, to make our role relevant, is to make sure that that conduit is open for two-way communication. So that was really exciting to see.
I really like the responses you got too. They were so constructive and helpful, well thought out. It's what I've experienced on other issues we've dealt with in the city. So I was excited to see that continuing on such a emotionally charged subject.
Thanks, Brian. Rich, do you have anything for this month?
So I just want to make an announcement that when in June, the June meeting will be my last meeting. I have served for, as I said, it'll be almost 7 full years, and I feel like it's time that I step aside and let somebody else in our community and from the church community serve, and I'll be looking for another area to be involved in the community. So I have enjoyed serving on it, and I've really enjoyed the long-term relationship that we've had with Diane and Bob and Chris and Lori, and then the relatively newcomers, Ralph and Megan and Mike and Brian. It's a great board. I'm so glad that I was able to serve on it from the beginning, and I'll probably keep an eye out on how things are going in the future. I think it really is an important board for our community.
Great, thanks, Rich. Bob?
We had a discussion several times actually about employers and whether they can require that employees take the vaccine. And I, because of my background, my profession in human resources, I get stuff here at home sent from various organizations. Nothing really has changed from what I reported previously. If anybody has any questions, let's hear them now. But basically, it's as I reported before. It's really up to the employer. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks. Did anybody have any comments to Bob? Because he did leave it a little bit open. No? Okay, we'll move on to Mike.
Thank you. Just first of all, just so everybody knows, if you see me sipping on this, it is in a wine glass, but it is not wine. It is some really awful tasting, healthy lemon lime drink. So I wish it were wine, trust me. But speaking of wine, just want to let everybody know that with the weather getting good, I am back to, on a part-time basis, slinging wine at the Beacon Hill Wineries. If anybody wants to go out on the weekend and have some good wine, come and see me. The last thing, I think I mentioned before that I was finishing up going through the FBI Citizens Academy. And my last class on that was completed. The graduation exercise is coming up, which is all of us getting to go out to the FBI's rifle range and firing off every type of weapon that they have. So I'm looking forward to that. But I did want to throw it out that if anybody is interested in participating in the FBI Citizens Academy, it's fascinating. Just reach out to me and I'll be happy to put your name in as a possibility. It's a lot of fun. The people are great. So if you're interested, just let me know.
Very cool. Thanks, Mike. Megan?
So I have one thing that I found somewhat interesting. I was reading the Washington Post this week, and they had a 6 or 7 part section, 6 or 7 sections in one big area called Reimagine Public Safety or Reimagine Safety. And it went through all different facets of policing and different organizations. And they highlighted one talking about how we've been talking, like, okay, if we could like reimagine public safety in Sherwood, does the police need to show up to a teenager out of control? You know, the things Brian posted about. But there's a, Chief, you probably know of it. It's called Cahoots program in Eugene. And it got me thinking, which we can talk about later, we can talk about now, I don't care. But this, you know, I hate the term defunding the police. That just sounds like you're gonna like squash all police departments and have no police. And that's not at all what I want. But I like the idea of, you know, blending the strengths of different people in the community. So if they're, you know, really strong in one social area, they might be better on a call than an officer or than someone else. And so I was just thinking that that's kind of what Chief wanted us to think about and discuss with our friends and neighbors. But I liked knowing that Eugene has a program that's been so successful at it. Maybe we could, Chief, I don't know if there's a way to reach out to the Eugene Police Chief and get information on how that works, how that started. The article didn't go into the Cahoots program in much detail. And my Googling led me to like the actual clinic that puts it on more than how it works with the police. Does that make sense? Like maybe if we can use it or similar resources in our town, maybe figuring out how we start that process. I hope that's not too much of a rambling.
No, thank you for your comments, Megan. And now I will, as Brian indicated, he shared the comments he received with me. And it's become very obvious to me that there is a lack of information about the resources that we do have and utilize in Sherwood and in Washington County to deal with those in mental health crisis. So we have what we call the Mental Health Response Team, and it's known as MHRT. And MHRT is different from Cahoots in that it involves a police officer. Most of them are Washington County deputies that have been specially trained in crisis intervention training, what we refer to as CIT, but it's training on how to respond to those individuals in some kind of a crisis, mental health or otherwise. So they are not just what you would call, for lack of a better term, a regularly trained police officer. They have received a significantly higher level of training specific to crisis intervention. They are paired in the same police car with a master's level mental health clinician. So this is different than the Cahoots model because the Cahoots model does not have a mental health clinician. They utilize EMTs or paramedics coupled with a lower level social worker, mental health technician kind of a level. And I may be using the wrong terminology there, but so they're different models, but they really operate in much the same way. So we utilize the MHRT in Washington County to respond to any calls that involve mental health, where we can use them to intervene with the folks in crisis. And again, so when they show up, it involves somebody who has a master's degree in mental health and related fields. They are an actual clinician, and so they're able to work with the individuals. The highly trained deputy is able to assist, and not only will they deal with the situation on hand, but then they will then follow up with that individual or that situation, and they will track that to make sure that the person gets the care and the resources that they need. So it's just a different model. It's extremely successful for us. It's been around for several years. I don't know exactly how long, but I know it's several years. And so I think what we need to do is, for the April meeting, we need to have the folks from the MHRT come in and explain what they do and how it operates. I can tell you that in Washington County right now, presently, there is a lot of work being done to expand MHRT so that we have more of those resources available. Washington County delegates from Washington County have communicated, traveled to Eugene and talked to the Cahoots folks and compared notes, and so we're very familiar with that program, and it's a very successful program. One thing I would point out is that oftentimes when we encounter people that are in mental health crisis, they are not safe, and the legal terminology we use is that they are a threat to themselves or somebody else. So they're not in a safe situation, and most often we think of that by way of saying they're either suicidal, they've threatened to commit suicide, or they've somehow indicated that is a risk for them, and certainly that's not what we want to have happen. And so in those situations, we can place somebody into a civil custody or protective custody, and it's what we refer to as a police officer hold. And what we do is we take them into custody and we transport them to the nearest hospital. We're required by law to go to the nearest hospital where they can be evaluated by a doctor who can then determine if they need additional care beyond that. And once we get them to the hospital, we're not involved. And so it's important to note that one distinction with having a police officer involved in the process is that they have the legal authority to take somebody into custody and to get them the help they need if they're in some kind of an extreme circumstance. So I'm going to, as opposed to if they're, civilians and they're able to help. But then if it gets to a situation where somebody's clearly a danger to themselves, they would then need to call somebody to come in and address that situation. So I'm gonna leave it at that point, and we will absolutely follow up. I would ask that you please communicate with your friends and neighbors that April would be a good. They should be watching every meeting, right, of the Police Advisory Board, but certainly April, we'll see if we can't get MHRT in. We'll publicize it, and we'll give folks an opportunity to know exactly what's being done. But there's, I'm extremely proud of of that resource, and it works quite well. So, but as I said, it's obvious that not a lot of people knew about it.
Are there other organizations with whom we work for non-mental health issues?
Oh, there's all kinds of resources that we can get people involved with depending on their area of need, right? So if they're
like on a call.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the specific situation or circumstances, but we can get them connected with all kinds of resources. We can provide them emergency gift cards if they have an immediate need that they need to get gas or they need to get some kind of a shelter or clothing. That's fairly routine.
I was thinking about if it's a non-mental health issue, but an officer isn't really necessary. Do we have any like civilian patrol or anything that would step in? Okay.
No, we don't. So one of the things that we're working on in Washington County is developing the protocol and the ability for dispatch to transfer obvious mental health crisis calls to the crisis line. So that would bypass the police response at that point, and we get people connected with the crisis line. But an important distinction, it's absolutely accurate that a lot of these matters could be handled by a non-sworn police officer, but it's equally important to remember that most of these calls come in because they have reached the point of crisis and somebody doesn't know what to do, and the person has either become violent or is threatening violence or is somehow endangering themselves or other people. And police officers are the ones that are trained to deal with that. Now, we want to minimize that as much as we possibly can, but there's going to be a percentage of calls that social workers just aren't going to want to go to because they don't have the protective equipment. They don't know what they're walking into, and so that's from my perspective, that's an important distinction to also remember. So I think the perfect scenario is somewhere in the middle. And if we can try to figure out that comfort zone where we have the right number of resources and we're able to screen incidents better and get more of them to the crisis line that need to go to the crisis line. And for those that appear to end up with us to respond, have resources like the mental health response team that can come out and help address those situations.
Okay, thank you.
Chris.
I just was gonna add that this week, Congressman DeFazio, who represents Eugene, and Senator Wyden both introduced companion bills to use the cahoots as a model for this kind of policing, I don't want to say reform, but alternative. So that just hit Congress this week.
Okay, and then Chris, actually, it's your turn next if you have anything else, just kind of to add.
I just want to say that, Chief, I noticed with my travels back and forth to work that you had a radar cart on Oregon Street, and that was appreciated this last week or so coming into town, and everybody was slowing down to 25. So I'm glad we're utilizing our tools.
Lori, anything to add or anything going on with the foundation?
The foundation is still working on putting together the gala. Again, it's going to be in May 12. We're currently putting together sponsorships and seeking donations. But beyond that, I wanted to go back to something that Chris had brought up a couple of months ago about the police department's volunteer who had come down with COVID. March 10, she was released from the hospital. So yay, welcome home. 92 days, they said. So hopefully she's doing well and she's getting stronger, and I'm sure she's just ecstatic to be home.
Yes, thank you, Lori. My only thing to add this month is thank you to Chief, to whoever posted on the social media about the school zone speeds being back in effect now that schools, for the most part, every school has at least some back in the building. Even the high school and middle school have the limited in-person. So thank you for posting that, because honestly, as I was driving around town, you know, I was kind of wondering when that switches over. So I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people saw that on social media. So then if there's nothing further on announcements, we'll move into the business section. And the first item is with regards to the Sherwood West Sherwood West Community Advisory Committee. The Sherwood West project has reached out, or the City of Sherwood planning manager has reached out, because they're looking to have a representative on a community advisory committee that they're putting together. And they're looking for somebody from both the Police Advisory Board and also, I believe it's Parks and Rec, to be a part of this committee. They said that the committee will probably meet about 7 or so times in the next 12 to 15 months. So the next year to year and a half, they anticipate they'll meet about 7 times. So they reached out to Chief to see if we could bring it up at our meeting and ask if there's a volunteer from our Police Advisory Board to sit on this planning committee. And then, I don't know, is everybody familiar with the project, with the Sherwood West Concept Plan project, or?
Not
no?
well.
Okay, well, they sent a little blurb, so I'll just read exactly what they said. So hopefully that makes sense. So the Sherwood West Relook project aims to prepare a Sherwood West concept plan by updating the 2016 Sherwood West preliminary concept plan. The outcome of this relook will be a Sherwood West concept plan compliant with Metro Title 11, planning for new urban areas. The city is now updating its comprehensive plan, which has not been updated since 1990, and it anticipates adopting a new plan by the summer of 2021. From the current policy work through the comprehensive plan update, it is recognized that the preliminary concept plan developed in 2016 needs to be revisited for consistency with updated community goals and policies, specifically those relating to jobs and housing. The project will also address land use, transportation plans, and land use growth patterns in the area of Sherwood West. So the west part of the city of Sherwood. Kim, sorry to put you on the spot, but is that sort of that area out by the high school and all that undeveloped land over in that part of town?
Correct.
Okay. Megan, did you have a question?
Yeah, following that, so I guess I'll direct it at Kim. Can you help me understand more specifically, like, are we talking about like the neighborhood, like Meineke area and Hanley and like between Edie and Chapman, or is it somewhere west of, like there's Edie and I don't remember what that road is behind Edie, but, or is it more like that way? Like if you were going up the Edie Hill and then towards Newburgh.
Okay, I'm directionally Yeah. So where the new high school is and all that property is that west, around the new high school and towards Edie. There's some going towards Newburgh. It's all in the urban growth boundary. Or it's, yeah. I don't know if that helps. It's,
So, if I may,
please.
That side of 99.
it's
Yes.
it's roughly from Chapman Road north to Edie Road, and it actually spills a little bit north of Edie Road, but I don't know exactly where the boundary is, kind of towards where Roy Rogers, and I think maybe it's Stark, but anyway, and it's everything west of Elwert Road.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes the property that the new high school's on, all that farmland there that is slated for that's the next major development area for Sherwood to move into. So it's a fairly significant piece of real estate.
Okay,
And to
thanks.
update the concept plan along with our comprehensive plan update, then that will help advise council whether or not we want to put together a request to Metro for any UGB expansion in this cycle, which we actually, us in the city of Tigard, asked Metro for a 6-month extension on that due to COVID, so that we can get this concept plan done and determine whether or not we want to request any more land be brought into the UGB.
Megan, did you have another question?
No, that was it. Is my hand still up? Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Technical
Anybody
stuff.
else have any questions, or is there any interest? Because they're looking for somebody, to bring sort of our ideas, and not just our ideas, our community's ideas, right? But also from, the standpoint of having the experience of sitting on this board and what that might mean for the future planning.
Well, I would wonder, does anyone on this board live in that area? Because they're going to be probably more invested.
I wouldn't think anybody would live in that area because none of them would be city residents if they did live over there in city limits.
Then it must not include that neighborhood I'm thinking of across the 99.
No, it's really all the rural area out there, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all the farmland west of Elwert Road.
Yeah.
So if you drive on Edie past the police station and you go out to the new 4-way stop sign that has the new traffic signal, that's Elwert Road. If you turn left on Elwert, that'll take you all the way down to the new high school. And Sherwood West is everything on your right-hand side, all that rural country farmland.
Okay.
That's what Sherwood West is. So Councilor Young's right. There's really not anybody per se
Qualify.
side of, with the exception of a few farmhouses, but there could be neighborhoods on the other side of Elwert that would be city residents and might be interested. But anyway, yeah, so they're looking for a representative from the police advisory board to sit on that committee. So.
And just to clarify, I misspoke saying all that land was in the UGB. All that land is in the urban reserves and will need to be brought into the UGB for any development.
So then, Chief, on that, do you know, of course I'm sure they probably would like to add somebody, as soon as possible, but do you know what their timing is on that they needed a response by? If there's people here that might want to think it over, or?
Yeah, they were hoping for a name by the 25th, I think it was, of March.
Okay, so next week.
We might have to draw straws.
Okay, so Then reach out to the chief if you're interested. Otherwise, yes, we might just have to, figure out sort of how to divvy it up, since we also, have a couple sitting on the traffic safety, and then Lori on the foundation, so yes. The next
And
item,
isn't the traffic committee coming up too? We're gonna have
yes. It is.
July 1st.
They both nod. So those will be up for opening as well. If we're looking to shift people around, keep that in mind. So then, Chief, do you want to go ahead and move into the policy reviews?
Sure. So beginning tonight is where we get to see the new numbers. So the first chapter we're going to go over is 304. And I believe it used to be 309 or something like that. And but anyway, it's actually a policy that we've gone over previously, but I just wanted to touch and highlight one change very quickly on this chapter. So if you'll refer to section 304.10.3, it's a subsection entitled Safety Procedures. And you'll notice that those 4 paragraphs deal specifically with shotguns specifically designated for use with kinetic energy projectiles. Then it goes on to talk about safety considerations for those. The reason for that policy language is because obviously a shotgun, in the manner in which it could be used as a regular firearm, or it could, as this policy language discusses, could be used to deliver a kinetic energy device. So that language, just want to point out, is will probably be removed in the next update. So we are no longer using shotguns to deliver kinetic energy devices. So we are now utilizing 40 millimeter kinetic launchers, is what they're called. And they are something that we've planned for and budgeted for over the last, probably a couple years. We've been discussing and getting ready to transition to those. So they, at some point, we will, it's kind of difficult in the virtual setting, but at some point through community academies and so on, folks will be able to see what those are. But they actually deliver a foam. So it's literally a piece of rigid foam. And that's the projectile that comes out of them. They are no different than any other kinetic energy projectile. They are intended to strike a subject and cause pain to get them to comply with orders to drop their weapon, or whatever the case may be. So just wanted to point out that we're no longer using those shotguns. So even though that language is in there, that's no longer happening. So any questions on that? So I believe
do we have any statistics showing like the reduction in use of force since the agency has moved more towards the martial art philosophy?
No, we review our use of force annually. And so at the end of each year, we gather the statistics, and I can tell you that the percentage of times we use force is pretty low. So I don't have that data. We'd have to go back and look. And we're still kind of in that transition of utilizing jiu-jitsu is what it is. And integrating that in with our physical use of force training. So that's kind of an ongoing process. But to answer your question, no, I don't have that data. We'd have to go back and look and see if there is any noticeable change. I do not believe that there is, but I don't know.
Chief, this is Chris. So currently, before you phase these out, you have one shotgun that you have to change the ammunition out from pure deadly force to kinetic, right? Or do you have separate guns?
The only shotguns we had were used solely for kinetic munitions. Okay. They were marked as indicated in this policy, and they were stored uniquely and individually, and so as to eliminate any kind of confusion like that. They had orange stocks and orange slings. And
all right, because I remember there was, and maybe it was in the city of Portland, they had an situation where somebody had improperly loaded a orange with a hot round, and somebody got either killed or hurt badly. So
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. So we had policy and procedures to prevent that, because they would only, we just didn't have live shotgun rounds. We just didn't have them. So any other questions? Now I will also point out very quickly that you may read on the use of kinetic energy devices. There's other types of rounds that can be used in those, but we will not be using any of those different types of rounds. We won't be using rubber bullets. We won't be using any solid objects, anything like that. The only thing we'll be utilizing will be these blue foam, like I said, condensed foam rounds that they bounce off, and so. Okay. Very good. So then we move on to policy 305, which deals with firearms. Now, the way our policy is broken out, if you've reviewed this ahead of time, you've already seen this, but this only deals with the firearms that will be issued and carried, the training, the security, so on and so forth. It doesn't deal with what happens when an officer gets involved in a officer-involved shooting. That is a separate policy that we will be covering either next month or the month after. It's pretty close after this one, but this deals specifically with firearms. So it's, as we've gone through other policies, obviously I'm not going to read read it word for word, but it talks about our handguns. It does talk about shotguns. That language is in there because even though we've not carried traditional shotguns, we've only had those kinetic. We do have the language in case now that we no longer utilize the shotguns for kinetic energy. Shotguns can be utilized as a support firearm. So we have the policy language in there if we choose to do that. We're not issuing those at this point, but if we choose to, that language is there. And then patrol rifles, which we do carry. And I'm just going to insert pauses here if anybody has questions about any of these sections. Again, it just talks about what the various tools are for and what the expectations are. And
why can a police officer carry a personal handgun while on duty?
Why can't or can?
Why can?
In Sherwood, they can't unless it's authorized. And we don't have anybody authorized to carry a personal firearm on duty unless it's a backup weapon. That would be the only situation. So some officers have their primary duty weapon, and that's what you see in the holster when they're in uniform. And some officers may carry what's called a backup weapon. They'll have it concealed inside their vest or their uniform or someplace. And that is, those are carried in case the primary weapon were to malfunction or it were to get knocked away in some kind of a scuffle. or an event where an officer is fighting for their life and they can't get to their primary duty weapon. But not every officer carries those, but that would be one situation. This policy addresses those. But that would be a situation where somebody could choose to carry their own weapon, assuming it met the terms of this policy, which meant it had to be inspected and it had to be approved.
So we have the policy in place in case it ever occurred, but it's not allowed currently in Sherwood.
No, it would be allowed only as a backup weapon, but not as a primary duty weapon. So everybody you see in uniform, the firearm you see in their holster, in their uniform holster, is a department issued, department owned firearm. None of those are personally owned. And I don't know that I couldn't tell you how many officers, if any, are carrying backup weapons. I just don't know that off the top of my head, but if they are, that would be a personally owned weapon that would need to be inspected and approved for them to carry. And it wouldn't be approved until they were demonstrated their proficiency and so on and so forth. Same standards as with any other firearm. And those are spelled out here. Now, when I started in Sherwood in 2008, everybody was carrying their own weapon. And that is not an uncommon practice for departments to choose not to provide firearms. That's really the other. There's two ways to do it, obviously, right? And that's one way. The other way is for the department to purchase weapons. It's my opinion that having department purchased and supplied weapons is the better practice. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. Police departments and chiefs need to make their own decisions, but that's my decision. That's what I believe is the best. And so we transitioned, I don't know when it was, probably around 2009, 2010, with the support of the Budget Committee and City Council. We budgeted to purchase department weapons, and we did so, and that's where we've been ever since. So it's important to understand that, because you may talk to a friend of a friend who says, oh yeah, they work at ABC Police Department and they have to provide their own gun. That's not uncommon. When I started in my police career in 1989, I had to go down to the police supply store and buy all my holster and my belt and equipment and firearm. That was all on my dime. But we don't, that's not the situation or the case here in Sherwood. Mike has a question.
Yeah, Chief, I've gone through training for concealed carry permit, et cetera, and one of the things I got to do was try out a lot of pistols, and my instructor said that, everybody has their favorite, what feels good, what fits, what doesn't, et cetera. And I was just wondering if you got any pushback from your officers just in terms of, this is a great pistol, but it doesn't fit my hand. I would prefer this versus that. Do they have a choice of 1, 2, 3 models, or is it just this is your pistol and this is what it's going to be?
We authorize Glock 9mm pistols for duty carry, and there are a couple different models available. So they do have some choice with regard to model, but they don't have a choice with regard to manufacturer and caliber.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we move, so then authorized secondary handgun, that's what I just talked about, what I referred to as a backup. And then the other situation where somebody could carry a personally owned weapon would be when they were off duty. But that was not Megan's question. Megan had asked about being on duty. But of course, when people are off duty, police officers have you can consider it like an automatic. As a certified police officer, you have an automatic concealed carry license. And they can choose, again, with approval and authorization and training, they can choose to carry a personally owned firearm off duty in accordance with the language and policy there. Ammunition, pretty self-explanatory. We provide the firearm, we provide the ammunition. It's all department approved, and it's ammunition that's been, it's just not whatever we can find on sale. It's what's been tested and evaluated, and you'll find that our ammunition is probably very consistent with what most police departments are carrying. And then the main section goes into firearms training and qualification. Obviously, it's critical that police officers be proficient with their firearms. And if they have difficulty, then they get more training and will train through difficulty. I think there may be an assumption, I could be wrong, but I think there may be an assumption, at least what I've heard throughout my career, is that you see a police officer and you just kind of assume everybody who's a police officer is a good shot or an expert shot or, whatever. Not everybody takes the firearms the same, and certainly we hire police officers that have never fired a firearm in their life, and we've hired some that have quite a bit of experience with them. So it's our job to make sure that they're able to become proficient to a high level, and if they aren't, then they will not carry that firearm. So I guess there is a part of that assumption that is I probably misspoke and said the assumption that every police officer is kind of a gun person, and that's not the case. But they are required to demonstrate proficiency, and we have firearms training multiple times a year to keep people proficient and to keep their skills sharp, and to also build on decision-making skills with regard to when they would utilize a firearm and when they wouldn't. Okay, hearing no questions, firearm discharge. So this talks about really kind of a non-violent encounter type of a discharge. Obviously, anybody that discharges a firearm needs to make a report, needs to report it to the supervisor, and or depending on the circumstances, give some kind of a statement, and then it lists a couple of the more common reasons why somebody would discharge a firearm that's not necessarily in the defense of their person in the traditional sense of the word. In other words, they're not dealing with an armed, dangerous individual. So there is policy that deals with destruction of animals. Not a very nice way to put that, but it's what it comes down to. If there's a dangerous animal and the officer is being threatened, that policy identifies it. But I think it's important to note that in the second paragraph, it talks about if you have any kind of forewarning or foreknowledge that this may occur, in other words, you're going to a house and you know there's a dangerous dog there, then the expectation is that you would take steps so that you would not have to, use your firearm for that, but you could use some other way to control the animal. And then injured animals, of course, those are unfortunate situations, but it does happen where a deer or some other animal has been struck by a car and is suffering, and the officer can make that determination to end the animal's suffering and euthanize the animal. We also have several times where officers will scoop the animal up and rush it to the emergency veterinary care, which probably happens more often with domesticated animals than with wild animals. But interestingly enough, we did have an officer come across, and this was several years ago, an injured bobcat, and they were able somehow, probably because of the extent of the injury, were able to get the animal contained and took it to the emergency vet. But unfortunately, the animal didn't survive. So I can say with extreme confidence that our officers are not looking to have to deal with these opportunities and want to try to get the animals taken care of every chance they get. Warning or other shots, not encouraged. You pull the trigger, you're responsible for that bullet, and oftentimes we say it has your name on it. So whatever goes up has to come down. There may not be a safe way to do that. And then the rest of the policy goes on to talk about supervisor responsibilities. The support captain is the one that is responsible to make sure the training is taken care of, firearms training is documented and it happens, and so on and so forth. Flying while armed, there are occasions, albeit limited and rare, but there are occasions when a police officer will need to board an airplane in an armed condition. And the Transportation Safety Administration and the FFA have very strict guidelines about when those circumstances are and when they aren't, and what conditions need to be met and qualifications need to be met in order for that to happen. If a police officer is going on vacation and they want to take their gun with them, that is, I can tell you that does not count. So the most common scenario would be an officer is needing to travel to another state to take custody of somebody and extradite them back to Oregon, and will likely be flying armed to do so, and then will be flying back home with somebody in a set of handcuffs. So most of the time the county custody agents for the sheriff's office take care of that, but there is occasion when a police officer, if they're the lead investigator on the case, they may become involved in that as well. Carrying firearms out of state, pretty straightforward. It's incumbent upon every officer to make sure that they know what the laws in that state is. Then it goes on to talk about how we care for the equipment and the different equipments associated with the firearms. We do not use any kind of special sights on our handguns. We do have optics on our rifles, and those again are all department provided and department maintained. Safe handling, inspection, and storage. So the first section there talks about duty-related items, but it's not restricted to duty, and how you should how you should handle a firearm. Firearms need to be maintained, inspected, make sure they're in good working order. They need to be properly stored. And one of my favorite sections, and I think probably one of the most critical sections of this entire policy, is storage at home. And it's incumbent upon an officer and the responsibility of every officer to make sure that if they take their duty weapon home or any weapon that is associated with their duty and service as a Sherwood police officer, that is always under their care and control. And if not, then it needs to be locked away where unwanted hands cannot get a hold of it and have a tragedy that would be life-altering for sure. So that's an important piece. And in fact, to that end, the police department several years ago purchased, actually before I got here, purchased some small handgun storage safes and gave one to every officer so that they would have be sure and have a safe that they could lock their firearm on. And then we revisited that and bought another supply. Oh, it's probably been about 3 or 4 years ago. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lori Zwingli, but I think the Sherwood Police Foundation provided the funding to buy another round of small safes so that the handguns could be secured at home for the officers to take home and secure their guns. So it's a big priority. And then, of course, alcohol and drugs. I mean, you can't overstate the obvious, but certainly that's a pretty critical component. Alcohol and drugs and guns and all those things do not mix at all, ever, under any circumstances. I see Brian has his hand up. Is that a new question?
Yes. Do you as a chief encourage or discourage them to take their department-issued firearms home?
Neither. That's really their choice. It's kind of depends on where is home. What's the travel look like? There's other considerations. I mean, as somebody that may not have kids at home, then it's an entirely different scenario compared to somebody who does have kids at home. So, I mean, there's just a lot of variables. So, certainly if somebody wanted my opinion, I would need to know the circumstances and the situation and so on and so forth. But we don't take a position one way or the other. We just demand that the firearms be stored safely and be locked away so that accidents don't happen.
I'm sorry, a two-part question. So if they are taking that weapon home, then are they still using the same holster? I know we spoke of that last month, of the type of holsters they have to ensure that it doesn't get taken from. Are they using that that holster in the transport?
No, so those holsters that we discussed last month are what we refer to as duty holsters, or another way to think about it is a uniform holster. And so that is, now it's entirely possible and allowable if an officer chose to wear some or all part of their uniform home, that's okay. And so they may have that holster. But they may also choose to come to the office, get dressed into their uniform and get ready for duty there in the locker room. And so they would have some kind of other holster or security conveyance to have that firearm in. There's boxes you can buy that get installed in your vehicle that you can lock the gun in. There's paddle holsters that you can have for plain clothes wear, and I would say that's probably the most common. Chris.
Chief, when it comes to practicing with the firearm, the policy talks about training and certification, but practice is important too. And are the officers, is there scheduled practice time at the range that you have at the station, or are they expected to do that off-site at a gun club or something like that?
Yeah, I think most of that probably happens as a part of our firearms training, scheduled firearms training, and in combination with the officers off-site if they have a membership somewhere. We don't have specific range times because it's a staffing challenge, right? So I don't want somebody to be in the range without somebody on duty. It's not because we don't trust them, but it's simply because accidents happen, and I don't want somebody to be in there by themselves and have an accident happen, and there's nobody there that they can radio for help or that can apply first aid. And then I also don't want, and this is unpleasant, an unpleasant topic and talk about, but just it's based on our history, our very unfortunate history, but I do not want an officer to have solo access to some place like the range where they can go with their firearm if they are in some kind of a mental health crisis, and then we have a tragedy. So those are some of the reasons why we don't have that. At some point, if we're able to work out the staffing and allow for a firearms instructor to be free to be able to be in the range for an open period of time, we would certainly like to do that, but that's where we're at right now. I can tell you that I don't know what happens now. The first part of my career, I was provided as an officer, I was provided a membership, at Tri-Counties so that I could practice. And I was also provided a certain number of rounds per month that I could utilize that the department bought. So I honestly don't know how common that is or isn't anymore, but that's how I spent the first probably 10 to 15 years of my career. And I spent a lot of time at the range. But
thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? If not, we're done with our policies. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Chief, really quick, since we're on business, Rich brought up that he was going to transition out in, I believe he said June would be his last so I assume then we'll start going through the process of taking applications and interviewing. Do we know of any others at this time? Is it going to be more than one position, or?
As of right now, I've heard from 3 people, and Rich is just tonight is the only one that has indicated that is an open position that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
But that means that there's a few more people I need to hear from, one way or the other.
Okay, great. So then that leads us into the traffic safety update, please, gentlemen. Chris, Mike?
Chris, I just took a mouthful of salted
All right, I'll go.
things, so I'll let you start.
All right.
Sorry.
2 things. One, since Chair was just talking about the vacancy that we're going to have, we have a vacancy on the Traffic Safety Committee that we're going to be needing to, or the staff is going to have to start soliciting for. So if any of you know of anybody that you think wants to participate in this area, get them to submit the volunteer application or whatever the process is. I can't even remember for that vacancy.
Chris?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Sorry for the interruption. Actually, we referred to the previous set of candidates, and the selection group has chosen a candidate from that process to move forward. And so staff needs to process the paperwork and get that approved by the mayor in front of council for final appointment, and the committee will be full again.
So never mind. Then the other thing before I turn it over for Mike is one of the things that we do, we created for tracking our progress on the complaints is Angie has created a great form. And Chief, would it be possible that in the next packet for this advisory board that we share our tracking form so that they can see the kind of progress that we've made and the sorts of things that we've been addressing? I think it shows there's a lot of work here, and it's hard for Mike and I to really do service to the number of complaints and the process that we've gone through. So I would, as a committee member, like to share that with this board.
So very good suggestion and timely. So last week at the City Council annual goal setting, which I'm sure Councilor Young is going to fill you in about, one of the things that came up is that they would like to get I think it was a quarterly report, is what if I'm remembering right, that what we talked about, Councilor Young, from the Traffic Safety Committee, which would capture exactly what you're talking about. So I would pose this question to the Police Advisory Board. We could very easily share those quarterly reports with you all. If you would like something more frequent than that, we can do that. But it would be very easy to share those quarterly reports. That we're going to develop that format, right? We don't have that set up yet, but we're going to get that developed and could share it with you.
That sounds good. I just think that there's stuff that the Police Advisory Board should see besides Mike and I rambling on every month about what we've been doing. That's all I got. Mike, you're up.
Cool. One of the things that we discussed was having, and Chief, you may have to help me with this, Dr. Takalu.
Very good, yes.
Thank you, who is a traffic safety expert from Portland State.
University of Portland.
University of Portland, okay. 50-50 chance, what can they, yeah. Anyway, having Dr. Takalu come in, and Dr. Takalu apparently has done some presentations in Sherwood prior regarding traffic safety issues. But we thought having him come in and give a traffic safety workshop would be a good idea. The decision was made to kind of hold off on this until COVID has passed and we could actually open that up to the public. So that's kind of on hold right now, but that will be coming down the pike in sometime in the future. Chris, I had to say, sharing this thing is a fantastic idea. Thank you. I wish I thought to throw that out there, but you're way ahead of me. We did manage to close out a couple of the issues. Parking, driveway obstruction on Lavender Place. There's no parking signs going up on that. We didn't close that one out. That's pending the signs actually going up, but that decision has been made. So moving forward on that one. The issues at Meineke Parkway and Sequoia, striping and bush cutting down is going forward on that. That actually has to go to the city manager and after that to the public works, but again is in the process, so that'll happen shortly. One of the big issues, and again close to my heart because I live just right down the street from that, is street lights on the corner of Sunset and Ladd Hill. There's 2 lights there. One has obtained some brighter lights. The other one is still pending. But I noticed on the upcoming agenda for the Traffic Safety Committee, that intersection is again back in the, for further review. Someone has requested perhaps a stoplight there, etc. So Sunset and Ladd Hill or Sunset and Main, depending on which way you're coming, we'll be back in the news. And Chief, while I'm on that intersection, I just have to say, I was walking today, my daily walk, coming up Main Street, heading towards Sunset, and about half a block away, this pickup truck peeled from Sunset onto Main, tires screeching, and I thought, oh, you SOB. And suddenly, right behind it comes one of Sherwood's finest with lights flashing. And it was like, yes! Karma. I broke my printer, I think. What else going on?
So if I can quickly comment, I think it's important for, as the board knows and everybody listening at home, is the expression, you know, where's a cop when you need one? In Sherwood, it's the cops are always there when you need them. That's just how we roll.
That's it. Well, it was great. I loved it. I loved it. What was the other one? There's one more I thought. Oh, the roundabout at Cedar Brook Way. It was determined that that roundabout, the radius is just too tight to put in any lighting. So that particular one was denied. So, and Angie is, and thank you, Angie, for this. Angie does a great job in getting back with the people that have made these requests in terms of letting them know what's going on, what's been approved, what's been denied, et cetera, and we appreciate that. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young, we'll move on to your update, please.
Great. Well, as Chief mentioned, last Thursday evening, we had a council goal setting session after it had been previously canceled from, I think, 2 Saturdays prior to that because our consultant is out of Texas and there was a little bit of a snowstorm there that he wasn't able to get on his plane. So we had it last Thursday evening. It was the first time in a year that council has been together in the same room. We had it at the Art Center where we could all spread out. The staff was sitting up in the stands, all socially distanced. We had our masks on, except when we were eating dinner. But it was a really good goal setting. But primarily, we did so many robust goals last year that a lot of them are still in progress and will be in progress for quite some time. So we have some that we fine-tuned. We were able to take some of the goals off. but most of them are just continuing forward. And we didn't add too many new goals, but one that we did add for the public safety section would be to begin working on our phase 2 staffing plan. So we've just finished up our current staffing plan as of this current budget cycle, right, Chief? Correct. Okay. And so next,
Sorry, I was muted.
Next is to start planning for the phase 2 of when Sherwood West grows, when Brookman grows, when, things like that, so that we're prepared and we're not playing catch up like we were this time. So that's a new thing. We also are going to have some goals on DEIA, primarily starting out making a statement for the city, and then we're going to start reviewing our hiring policies and meet with our HR department and see if and what anything needs to be changed in our hiring policies, or if we're doing a good job at what needs to be done around those goals. Also today or yesterday, I was informed that the city manager extended our alfresco dining through April 30th. So for another month. We will reevaluate that around April 15th to see where we're at with COVID, where we're at with the state guidelines, and whether our restaurants can start opening more before we open up Railroad Street again. And then the other thing, we just had a Tuesday night at we had a work set. Well, we had the city council is also an advisory committee for the community enhancement grant program with the funds from Metro. So as the committee and with our representative from Metro, we reviewed applications and were able to grant somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000 in grants, and just a couple ideas for those grants. And again, these grants are open for nonprofits to apply for every year. So if you know of any, I don't know that everybody knows about this. We try to advertise it as best we can, but we were able to grant funds to the Sherwood Friends of the Sherwood Senior Center for them to purchase a 15-passenger van for our seniors. And the Friends of the Senior are donating the other half, so it's matching funds to help get our seniors sometimes to medical appointments, help get meals delivered through, with volunteers doing that work. So that's pretty exciting. We are also funding funds for the CASA for children of Multnomah and Washington and Columbia counties. And that's for the foster care program, getting CASA volunteers trained. That Lori looks like has a look on her face. And then we're also granting funds for Cruise in Sherwood and Robin Hood Festival. Last year they didn't get their events held, so they are going into both of their seasons this year a little bit cash strapped. So we're hoping that we'll have some good functions this year. I know Cruising is planned. I don't have details on Robin Hood and whether they're for sure doing theirs. Then the Historical Society, we are granting funds. They're getting their foundation fixed for their building. So they've had to take down the train, store it for 2 months while the foundation's getting prepared, and then revamp the train to be a little bit smaller because something about the dimensions of the room are going to change a little bit. So we've granted them funds and then having a professional come in and reconstruct that train down there. And then the YMCA is coming up with some STEM programs. So we're going to grant them some funds to get their STEM programs up and going. And the last one was the in-kind boxes, which are gift donation boxes through the Share Center for pregnant moms. So yeah, so it's kind of exciting. Every year we have grant funds available through Metro. So if you know of any worthy programs that could use funding, it opens usually around January application time. And then that's all I had.
I think Megan had her hand up first with a question.
Thank you, Diane. My question is for Kim. What does DEIA stand for? You said it's going to be part of the new hiring process. I'm assuming it's diversity, equality of some
Diversity,
sort.
equity, inclusion, and accessibility.
Okay, so I had 75% right.
I just learned of the A part recently from Renee.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so, we're starting to evaluate our processes and see to make sure we're as diverse as, equity, as inclusive as possible, and accessibility. So that's where we thought we would start, is if within our hiring practices within the city. So
Yeah, DE and I made sense to me. The A was new.
yes.
And then Mike, I think, has a question as well.
You're muted.
Yeah, this is for Kim. Kim, I should know this as well, but who is our current Metro representative?
Why is his name escaping me? Rosenthal. What's his first? Garrett Rosenthal.
Good job.
I'm like, GR, what was that? I only met him once via Zoom, so.
Okay, thank you.
And then Brian, did you have a question?
There we go. Yes, some of the feedback we got from the citizens was around code enforcement. So everything from barking dogs, parking, all of that, and it's maybe a question more for the chief. Do we still have someone mentioned a code enforcement officer that we had? We still have a code enforcement officer.
We have a code enforcement. He's not called an officer. What is he called? Code enforcement.
Code compliance is
code
what it's.
Compliance.
Yeah.
Code compliance.
And that used to be a function of the police department, but it was a couple budgets ago, it was moved to the planning department. And so they have a full-time code compliance officer. Well, officer, code compliance person, whatever.
Yeah. Who happens to be one of our former police officers.
Yes, as a former police officer. And so he handles all non-law related, criminal related code issues. Now there's a small subset of municipal code that deal with, for lack of a better term, criminal type of matters, but the majority of it, the code compliance. Dan Miller is his name, and he takes care of most all of that. Barking dog, those kinds of things. Our officers may respond initially, but a lot of that stuff can be referred for follow-up to code compliance to work with homeowners and residents and neighbors and so on and so forth.
All right, and his contact information is listed on the website. I think, like you were saying earlier, Chief, a lot of it is just finding this information and making it easy for the community to know who to call and what number to call, and not have to jump through 5 pages to get to the contact information. So
yeah,
and maybe it's putting out social media posts, Chief, of, hey, did you know we work with MHRT for CIT issues, or just things that you just know and are happy to share. Get out there, or use us to get that out there in little snippets.
Yep. Well, it's incumbent upon us to get the information out there, but I will tell you, in defense, it doesn't matter how many times you post, there's always going to be a handful of people that just don't, 20,000 people, and a really successful post for us. If I put a post on Facebook that says free ice cream or whatever, and I get 5,000 to 10,000 people engaged,
I'll be there, Chief.
Yeah. So that's 50%, right? I mean, we don't ever, and that would be an extremely successful post. A lot of our posts have engagement in the hundreds. So anyway, but yes, Brian, Dan Miller's information can be found on the website. They should be able to go right. If they go to the homepage and then across the top under departments, they should be able to go right to code compliance and find it. It shouldn't be too difficult.
We can always ask the admins of different community pages to post some of that information in their pin section, meaning top, if you're at their page, it's the top post that is there. So then they can use it to refer people in comments. Hey, see this pin post by the police department, things like that. To make sure that the information is there, even if, it's like saying, well, it's in the top left-hand drawer. go get it. We at least have access easily.
Also, another goal that is coming back onto our council goals is a revamp of our website, because our website is not very user-friendly. And then a communication plan on how we can better be communicating, and what does that plan look like? But we don't really have a communication plan, and we don't have a communications director, nor are we ever going to get one in the city the size of ours, you know. So really right now it's every department pretty much does their own posting. The police does theirs, the planning department posts their stuff. Joe Gall, the city manager, is quasi social media, you know, poster. So every department, everybody does their own stuff. So it's all very segmented without really an overarching communication plan. So that is one of our goals as well this year.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Councilor Young? Then we'll move on to staff report, please, Chief.
Yes, so I hope everybody knows, because you saw the post, but by the chance you didn't, I'm happy to report that Sherwood is once again the second safest city in Oregon. So we continue to rank very high on the safety measures. And each one of those groups that do that have a little bit different formula. They weigh property crimes differently, violent crimes differently. The way the population plays, it's all math. But regardless, the consistency is that we find ourselves in the top three a lot of the times, and most all of the time in the top 5 out of, I think there's 200 and I don't know, 200 and a quarter, somewhere around that, roughly, incorporated cities in the state of Oregon. So some of which are certainly much smaller than us. And so very, very happy with that. Very, very proud of the work that the women and men of the Sherwood Police Department do. Because quite frankly, I get to be the face. That's the easy part. The folks that are going out day in, night after night, and doing the work and being in the right place at the right time when the guy squeals his tires around the corner. Clearly not a crime of the century, but clearly a matter of livability for anybody in that area, and certainly for Mike or whoever's walking. I mean, those are the kinds of things. It's good police work, and it's important that you all know, as a police advisory board and citizens of Sherwood, that you have an amazing group of people that you can call your police officers, your guardians, and it's because of them that you enjoy the livability and the high level of safety and the low level of crime that you do. And we depend on the community to help us with that. There's no question. But Megan, I appreciated your comments earlier about the silliness of defunding the police. It's just it's a notion and a concept that is often misquoted and misunderstood. And we will be the first to stand up and say, we never asked to be the social workers and the first responders to somebody's mental health crisis. That was never anything that policing in Oregon said, hey, yeah, we'll do that. It was thrust upon us out of necessity, and we have trained and tried to do the very best we can to respond to those, and have not always done it right. But needless to say, very happy with the job that our folks do in town here. Quick follow-up on the use of force discussion. Thank you so very much for the feedback that I've already gotten tonight. Please continue with those conversations. Please do the best you can to capture any and all comments you can. I know that's asking a lot, but if there's any way for you to jot notes down, not everybody's going to go through social media, but if you have the ability to sit down at your home computer and say, okay, I talked to 5 people and I want to capture their notes really quickly, that's going to be extremely valuable, because we can refer back to those and try to bring them together. I want to clarify a couple things. while I appreciate folks, did I make that noise or? While I appreciate any effort that you all do on this, try to dive into citizens' expectations of us. That's an important part of this. What do they expect from us with regard to a use of force situation? That's number one. Number two, I think I will try to carve some time out next month where we can maybe develop some scenario-based questions that you can then pose to neighbors. In this type of a situation, how would you feel about the Sherwood Police Department doing this or allowing this to happen, or whatever the case may be? I think those may be very useful to present actual, like I said, scenario-based options to folks to get a feel for what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. So I think next meeting, we'll probably not do a policy because I am always sensitive to the time commitment that you all as volunteers put in. And so I think between an MHRT presentation and a little work session on some of these use of force scenario situations, I think we'll probably have our hour and a half filled up. So, so that's all I wanted to share by way of staff report. And otherwise, I'll give you a final call for any questions, and then we'll turn it back over to you, Diane.
Looks like Brian has a question.
Am I on? I have a question about kettling. I had never heard of the term before it was used by the Portland Police Department last week. There's a lot of people that thought it was unnecessary and it should not be used, and another group that thought it was excellent to use it. I'd like to know your opinion about that and whether, if the decision was up to you to use that in a situation as we've been having downtown, if you would want to use it.
Bob, I'm sorry, what was the term?
Kettling, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, they
Okay.
described it as they surrounded the group and
Right.
then they blocked off any entrance and exit points. And I might get this wrong, but I thought they were taking pictures then as people would leave so that they would have record if they needed to for their investigation of what was taking place. So they basically surrounded this group of like 100 people. Yeah.
Everybody had to show their ID and they took a photo of each individual.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So as I always do, I will provide my input and my opinion since you asked, but I would please ask that nobody interpret that to be an indictment on any other police agency or, because the number one rule is I wasn't there. I don't know the specifics of the situation, the dynamics that were going on at the time. I will further state that I am not an expert in crowd control. That is not an subject area that I've spent a lot of time on. And I rely on the information that I get from others. Somebody's sharing their screen. I don't know if that's on purpose or.
Yeah, I'm sure the same thing.
Is anybody?
Is that Angie? Who's?
No, it's not me.
No,
It was Chris. It was me. I don't know what I did.
Oh.
At least I didn't get knocked off.
Okay, well, you're still sharing your screen, Chris. So go to the upper right next to the leave button and there's a share content. That yeah, there you go. Okay, we got that fixed. Mike, Chris has to buy you ice cream now.
I'm sorry, Chief. Did you just give technical advice? That was awesome. Good
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
Count me in on the
Better
ice
than me
cream.
with-
Mark that down. Anyway, Bob, to get back to your question, it would seem to me that there could be some issues with boxing in a group of people without knowing that every one of them was subject to a legal stop. So police officers cannot detain somebody and request their identification without justification for a legal stop. We can walk up to anybody and say, hey, how you doing? And engage in conversation and, ask, hey, do you mind telling me what your name is? But we cannot detain them for that purpose, absent a legal justification. So it would seem to me that there may be some issue with a practice like that. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but from a legal perspective, I'm also not an attorney, so I will admit that this is kind of a difficult question, but I'm not familiar with the term also before hearing it tonight. So the other thing is unless you're planning to arrest somebody, we generally like to give folks, and you have probable cause, legal justification to arrest them, we like to give folks some kind of a way to escape, right? I mean, unless you're in custody, you need to be free to leave. I mean, it's just that simple. So those are the first two things that come to mind. But again, I'm not speaking to the specific incident, but I'm just trying to answer your question as best I can.
Okay, thank you for your input.
Any other questions for the chief? Brian?
Yes, just from what's been happening over in Atlanta, and it's definitely a hot topic here around the nation with regards to discrimination against those of Asian descent. Historically, have we seen anything like that here in Sherwood happening with our population here that may be of Asian descent at all?
No, not that I'm aware of. That's certainly not to say that there may have been specific incidents that I'm not calling, but certainly not any kind of a trend or anything like that I'm aware of. Since you bring it up, I will tell you that I've certainly been thinking an awful lot about that, and first and foremost, my hearts go out to all the victims in Atlanta. But I've long been appalled at the unfortunate history that our country has with regard to Asian Americans, dating back to World War II, certainly, but even before that. And unfortunately, Oregon has a rather ugly history as a state with pretty much any non-white, unfortunately, to include Asian Americans that were working on the railroads, to include other people of color that Oregon actually legislated that they couldn't live in the state. It's not very pretty, and I can tell you, as the parent of an Asian child, my heart is broken for those Asian Americans, those victims, and others that have suffered, as I said, over the years and present day. So
I have one question going back to you wanting us to find out the expectations of the community. I don't feel comfortable pulling from the manual, like the use of force section, and posting that, but do you have a 1 or 2 sentence quote you'd want us to put out there, like saying, what are your expectations for the SPD in regards to use of force using this definition of use of force? Is that something you could shoot an email out with language?
actually, I can, at the sake of oversimplifying, and I can just tell you right now that I would just ask that you pose that question. What are your
use of force?
What are your expectations with regard to Sherwood police officers and use of force? And then let that guide the conversation. There may be very simple answers that, well, they shouldn't use force unless absolutely necessary. There may be more complex answers depending on a person's level of understanding. So, and I think either and all are fine.
Okay, I'll do that tonight.
Any other questions? Okay, I think, Angie, we have a citizen email this time, don't we?
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead and read that?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
And it's in your packet, everyone, if you want to refer to it.
It is. All right.
And, Angie, before you start, just so everybody's clear, these comments came in. I think Councillor Young, if I remember, helped get the comments in from the citizen. And because there was questions that the citizen had that were very good, reasonable questions, I took the opportunity to go ahead and provide answers from my perspective, not to eliminate the fact that these were going to be citizen comments, but I just wanted her to have answers to her questions. So what you have in your packet are the comments that were submitted, and then my responses in red. So with that, Angie, go ahead.
Okay. So this was received via email on February 24th. My input on Sherwood Police to be shared at the Police Advisory Board meeting. First, they are doing a superb job in our community. There is no need for police presence in the public schools. That money should be better spent. Do our police wear body cams? Is there a need to apply for a grant to have them? If we have them, when are they activated? And the chief replied, Sherwood police officers do wear body cameras and they are activated on every investigative and/or official contact. All the videos are retained per the timelines established by state law. End of his reply. A real need is to educate our police concerning mental health issues. They need to have a resource, professional mental health provider on call, for example, to help them deal with mental health issues. Police can't have all the answers for all the problems they must deal with. And the chief replied, Sherwood police officers do receive training on mental health issues. Washington County has a mental health response team, MHRT, that is available to respond to and help officers deal with mental health issues. And we have one Sherwood officer that works directly with MHRT. End of chief's reply. There is a staggering number in our population who are on the autism spectrum. Why not have a training or two with the people and their families who are afflicted with this prevalent mental health issue? Treating people with respect who have mental health issues is very important. Often they are very anxious and just want to escape confrontation, so may want to walk away. The chief replied that training is covered as part of the mental health training the officers receive. Lastly, I would like to know what plans there are to retest the rape kits. Are they held in a refrigerator at the station? How many are there? Is there an expense in having them retested by CODIS? And CODIS, if you don't know, is a combined DNA index system. Is there a grant available if there isn't an expense? The victims need to be shown more respect by following up, not to mention protecting others. And the chief replied that every rape kit we receive is placed in refrigerated storage and sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab to be tested and entered into CODIS. Thanks for considering my concerns, Julie Nader, Sherwood resident. And that was that.
Looks like Brian has a question.
Yes, Chief, really quickly regarding the Washington County MHRT, are they directed by way of a 911 call, or how are people put in contact with them if they have a particular scenario in which their services would be helpful?
They can be placed on a call when it comes in through 911, or they can be requested by a police officer at any point during a call. So a police officer may be dispatched to a call, and they may review the call and immediately say, hey, give me an MHRT, or halfway through a call, they may realize that at least part, if not all of the issue is a mental health crisis, and they may request MHRT respond. It's important to remember that some calls come in as a clear mental health crisis. Other calls are what what I term as a mental health call in disguise. You don't know that it's a mental health call until you get there and begin to address it, and then you realize there's mental health issues. So really any and all of the above, they would be involved.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else have any final questions? Then go ahead, Mike.
This is totally off of everything, but it's been driving me crazy all night. This is a question for Brian. Brian, are you in a bunker? Are you in your attic? Are you in a tiny house out in your backyard? Where are you broadcasting from, my friend?
I am in our family room above my garage. And yeah, I turned the lights off because I was trying to do the blur background and I couldn't figure it out before the meeting started. So I just said, forget it. So you're seeing it looks like a long tunnel, but it's over my garage. As you can see, it's got the dormers. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, as long as we're on that, Chris, it's driving me nuts that your background looks like a midday office. Like the windows open with sunshine and light coming in. I'm like, that's not Sherwood dark right now.
It's a false background.
I know, and every time you go to get a drink, your arm gets cut off at the elbow. It's hysterical. So, while we're talking about those things.
Chris, did you have a question though right at the end? Or you're good? Okay. If there's no further questions, does somebody want to move to adjourn the meeting?
I move to adjourn our meeting.
Second.
Second.
Great. I don't think we got to vote for that, right? So the meeting is over.
Let's go, Mike.